Hello world. Tonight I'm going to do a video on what I consider to be the most essential post-punk guitarists in my lifetime. This list though um, it's going to be my opinion on who the best are. I know that obviously people have their own preferences, and this is a topic that's I would say is 100% subjective, so there's no way of really quantifying who's really the best. So everything I'm about to mention in this video will be obviously my personal opinion, and I will also caveat this by saying I really only have 15 minutes to work with because of the software I use, but this video could easily go an hour, maybe even longer. So when I go off my list, I'm only going to give a brief rundown of why I think these individuals deserve the accolades that I bestow on them. Obviously, when you get down to opinions, you know, there's my own personal reasons why I think they're better than, say, someone else. But I also want to say, yeah, some of these seem a little bit obvious, but they're the ones I like the best. So, I mean, you either agree with it or you don't. That's totally your prerogative. So, without any further ado, the first one, I'm not going in any certain order. It's not alphabetical, or it's just the first ones I wrote down. So, the first one on the list will be Mr. Daniel Ash. He's from, first of all, I'll say where they're from. He's from Northampton, England. He's came to prominence with a band called Bauhaus, but he obviously had other projects that were, some were more successful than others, I guess you could say, but he's also known for Levene Rockets and Tones on Tail, and a couple other side projects. I won't go into too many other details with side projects for any of these, because like I said, this video will have to fit within 15 minutes. But the reason why I like Daniel, and as someone who I do play guitar. I never said I played it well, but I do play it. What I like about Daniel is mainly his use of what I would call atmospherics, which is to say, yeah, guitars produce sounds, but other than just making chords or making, putting in solo lines or lead work, he had an ability to use feedback pretty creatively, and other textural ideas, like sliding between the strings with the pick, or behind the bridge, or the things that make these, I guess could be described as spooky sounds. But he was one of the first I heard do things like that. I mean, obviously there's been people who've done it since, like Ken Thale from Soundgarden. He kind of does that thing a little bit, like the thing behind the bridge, and in the headstock, hitting the strings up there, and makes those spooky sounds. But Daniel Ash was the first, like I said, the first I ever heard do things like that, and to great effect, I might add. But he's always been a favorite of mine, and a lot of that's because of things of that nature. But he also had very interesting guitar lines throughout the years. He even played a little bit acoustic here and there, and I think he always did a really fantastic job, and I think he deserves to be up there with some of the best ones. Number two is a guy named Geordie Walker from a band called Killing Joke. Oh, by the way, you probably see my hat and hear my accent, probably think, oh, you're a country and western guy or something. No, I've always been a rocker, so hate to disappoint anyone out there that thinks I'm some kind of backwoods hick, but yes, I did grow up in the backwoods, but that doesn't mean I'm a hick, but whatever. Anyway, Mr. Walker from Killing Joke. Killing Joke was always a band that I admired, um, mainly because of how strange they were. Um, they always had that weird tribal thing going on, and for some reason, always trying to predict the end of the world for some reason. But whatever, that's kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about. But what I like Geordie for is he always used that hollow body guitar, and he always got some pretty interesting sounds. His sound has always been described as being monstrous or huge, and I agree with that. He does have a very big sound, and that is not necessarily to say heavily distorted, which he does use distortion, obviously, but he seemed to get more out of less, being that he was the only guitarist in the band. Uh, and we're talking Killing Joke here, but he was always a really big uh, he just always was a guitarist that stood out to me, and that's the reason why, because he just had that big guitar sound, and I don't know if it's because of his. I'm sure his guitar had P90s in it or whatever, but he made those single coils sound bigger than a lot of people probably could do. But amazing sounding guitarist. The next one on the list is a man by the name of Keith Levene. He was from London. He's mainly known for being in a band called Public Image Limited. He was only in that band for one or two albums, I think. He was also he was in the Clash for a little while, even though he never. I don't think he ever. I think he co-wrote a song, but that was about it. I don't think he performed on anything, and he definitely didn't ever perform live. I don't think, but he. Supposedly he's very instrumental in getting Joe Strummer into the Clash, so kudos to him for that. But as far as his work with PiL, he's another one kind of like Geordie. He had a really unique and big sound, but I think he's probably more well known for his choice of guitar. He was one of the first to start using, instead of wooden body guitars, he used aluminum body or aluminum necked guitars. I think most of them were full aluminum though, like from headstock to tailpiece. But his guitar sound was also, I would say, was unique. I loved his sound. A lot of people didn't really care for PiL, but I thought they sounded fantastic, and he was one of the reasons why. And the next guy on my list, he kind of falls in the same category, and that's John McGeoch from Scotland. Yeah, he was in several bands. He's probably more well known for being in a band called Magazine, but he was also in Susie and the Banshees for a while. He was in PiL. He had a couple other side projects, but I'll mainly say that his work with Magazine is kind of what put him on the map. But he's another very influential guitarist from the post-punk era. because he, just like all the other guys on this list, had a very unique sound, but he's probably more well known for arpeggios. He's one of those guys that I would say got more out of guitar. The whole more is less is more approach, I guess you could say. Excuse me. And that's not to say that kind of sounds like I'm diminishing his work, which I'm not. I'm saying that even with conventional style arpeggios, he was able to make them sound very unique in a way that you don't hear too often from more, I guess you could say, more conventional style guitarists. I mean, just listen to something like Spellbound from Susie and the Banshees. Yeah, it sounds like there's more than one person playing. That's how good he was. I mean, just very, very cool sound. But he also, I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna stress too much on the side projects. But even some of the other stuff, like even in PiL, he had a very, very, like I was saying before, a very unique sound. Almost Keith Levene-ish in a way, but definitely his own. And I always thought he did exceptional work. My next guitarist is a guy named Rowland S. Howard from the band The Birthday Party. Now, if you're not familiar with by the way, he's from Melbourne, Australia. If you're not familiar with this band, they're probably most well known for a song called Release the Bats. The Birthday Party is a band that was, I guess, definitely more of an acquired taste. They sounded like four guys all playing something different at the same time, which, to maybe the average person that sounds awful, but I thought that was amazing because somehow they made it work. It's amazing how a band that always sounds like they're about to fall apart can be still like have that visceral impact. And they definitely had that because if you ever saw any of their live performances, they had 100% stage presence. I know we're talking about guitars, but I mean, look at the bass player, Tracy Pugh. He was mesmerizing. It's like you could almost not keep your eyes off that guy. But Rowland S. Howard, even his stage presence was a little unorthodox. It seemed like he was always walking around with a cigarette just barely hanging off his lips, and his playing was absolutely insane. But I loved it. It sounded completely unhinged. And what more can you want from a guitarist, right? I don't like players who all sound the same, and he definitely did not sound like anything I'd ever heard before, maybe even since. The next guy on our list is Andy Gill, who was he's from Manchester, England, but he is best known for a band called Gang of Four. But in later years, he was probably more known as a producer. Like he produced a lot of artists and albums and songs over the years. But in Gang of Four, he might be one of the most unique guitarists on this list because, when you think post-punk, you think, bands or sounds that came after, like, the Sex Pistols or, anything, Buzzcocks, anything like that going on in England at the time. But this is a band that, they did take some influence from that, but it seemed like they took almost more influence from things like funk or world music, things not really associated with punk rock. And so that's one of the reasons why he's on my list, because he most definitely had a unique sound, very abrasive but very melodic. Um, you know, Guitarists who are probably way more technical would even list him as an influence, because he brought so much uniqueness to the table. But definitely in my top 10, even though this is not 10 people, it's because of my time constraints that I've already mentioned. But what more can you say about that guy? He's just a very amazing talent. Okay, and then here we go. Next guy is I don't think you can do a list without him, and it's probably going to sound a little obvious, but I can't leave him off, because too much of my formative years have revolved around this guy. But Robert Smith is The Cure. I don't think he needs any introduction, but he was born in Blackpool, England, but he rose up through the years of when the Sex Pistols exploded in the mid-70s, and I think he was kind of associated before The Cure kind of got the ball rolling with their career, but with what's called a Bromley contingent. I don't know how much of that is true, and to me it doesn't really even matter that much. But the reason why I have Robert on here, other than the fact that he's pretty much a post-punk icon, is I always if there's going to be one person that I say is an influence, because I have to remove everyone else, I'm probably not going to remove him, because he's just too much of an anchor, I guess you could put it. His guitar sound is very distinct. You know it almost the minute you hear it. He's the whole reason why I would even consider buying a chorus pedal, because that's how much the Cure's sound is tied to that chorus pedal, or the Rowland chorus amplifier that was common around that time, that gave that really unique chorusy, swirly, whatever sound you want to call it, flangey kind of sound. It's not just the sound of the guitar and the amplifier, but also the type of modes and scales he would use. There was times where it sounded almost, I guess, Middle Eastern, and there's other times where it would sound almost Asian, like Japanese sounding scales or modes. But very interesting sound. I always thought he was pretty creative. And the other thing I liked is a lot of Cure songs were not, just short little pop songs. A lot of times they were kind of epic in scale, and punk was known for very short songs, and post-punk kind of started to break those rules, and I think he was one of the first ones to start taking advantage of we can do whatever we want now, and we're not restricted to these confining rules. But very, very innovative, in my opinion. Those sometimes that's a word that's thrown around a little too loosely, but you got to ask yourself, who was doing what he was doing around that time? I would say there's not too many that sounded like that or were doing the same thing he was doing. So, but definitely, I would say an influence on me, even though I don't really necessarily play that style of music, but definitely up there. And I'm going to kind of combine these two guys together because they were in the same band. But my last pick is for a band called Wire, which is one of my favorite bands of all time. And the two guitarists from that band were Colin Newman and Bruce Gilbert. Colin was born in Salisbury, and Bruce Gilbert was born in Watford, England. But these are two guys that obviously Wire was a huge post-punk band, but they had projects afterwards. But like I said, I'm going to only focus on, I guess what you could say, what they're really famously known for, so I can stay within some time constraints. But the reason why I like these two guys and the band Wire overall is when the punk thing in England was kind of dying out, and all this post-punk was starting to get kind of starting to rise in its place. Wire is a band that kind of stuck with some of the punk aesthetics, but obviously they, just like all these other bands on this list, started to experiment a little bit and not be so constrained by the rules of punk, in which, yes, when I say the rules of punk, that's exactly what I mean. Punk had too many restrictions, too many limitations. And what I mean by that is songs tended to be short. They tended to be, anti-authoritarian, all these things people associate punk with. And you can only listen to that for so long before you start going or saying to yourself, is there more to life than this? I mean, it's just like being married. It's like, can we branch out and try something a little different? And I think that's what got the ball rolling on post-punk. So this band, Wire, even though you could still hear some of the punk influences in their material, you could hear, like, they were starting to take some chances. Like, some of their songs even had like a almost like a South American feel to it, not quite bossa nova or something like that, but kind of like that in a way. Different uses of rhythm patterns and percussion, and just not so limited. And some of their songs were extremely short, even for punk standards. Like, I think some of their songs were only like 20 seconds long, something in that neighborhood. But they were also, and kind of later on down the road, they started experimenting with synthesizers and drum machines and things like that. And bands like Joy Division were doing that too. But I always thought they were pushing the boundaries probably more than any other group at the time. And the two guitarists, they had I don't know, I guess a sound that could be described as almost funky, kind of like Andy Gill. Yeah, you could hear the punk stuff in there, but you could also hear, like I was saying, like the kind of like the bossa nova kind of feel, or things along those lines. But anyway, those are my top. There were 8, I think, but yeah, those are my picks for the best post-punk guitarists of all time. Tell me what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are going to say, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but that's their prerogative. This is how I feel, and I don't think I would have it any other way. And anyway, but that's all I have, and have a good night.